Listeners, are you ready for a monthly literary adventure? Let me introduce you to the BFF Book Club. Join us each month to explore a new book across a wide variety of genres. After reading, connect with fellow book lovers and meet the author in a live Bookish Flights interview. Can't make the live? Don't worry, we'll send you the recording. Our September book club selection is Darkness Calls the Tiger by Janyre Tromp, which is a World War II historical fiction novel set in Burma. Head over to the link in our show notes to learn more and see our upcoming 2024 BFF Book Club selections.
Hi, this is Janice Robinson Daly from episode 32. I'm here to tell you about my most recent book, The Path Beneath Her Feet. Steeped in rich historical detail, Dr. Eliza Edwards, the ingenuine student in the Unlocked Path, becomes the mature mentor, steadfast in her calling to effect social change by addressing women's health issues and guiding others to realize their dreams. In 1936, as the Depression ravages careers, Eliza redefines her abilities, traveling to Georgia and Tennessee as she reclaims her purpose and rediscovers her ambitions. Returning to Boston, she endures heartbreak with the eruption of World War II, bringing chaos to the world and sending her sons into battle. Will her unyielding pursuit to limit suffering and save lives sustain her amid the tumultuous landscapes of 1930s and 40s America? Read The Path Beneath Her Feet to find out.
In today's episode, we have our first ever BFF book club. So it is your monthly literary adventure where we read the book, join the club, and meet the author. Tonight, I am honored to have Janyre Tromp with us, who wrote Darkness Calls the Tiger. Janyre is an award-winning and best-selling writer and veteran editor with a deep love for history. Her mid-20th century historical novels always simmer with a healthy pinch of deliciously creepy suspense and include Darkness Calls the Tiger, Shadows in the Mind's Eye, and Oh Little Town. And all that writing and editing happens in her unfinished basement when she's not hanging out with her family, two troublesome cats, and a slightly eccentric Shetland sheepdog. Welcome to the show, Janyre.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm super excited to be here.
Yes, I am so glad to have you. I had my eye on your book for many months before I got to pull it up. The cover is captivating, listeners. So if you have not seen it yet, go check it out. So I was excited to be able to invite you on the show.
Well, thank you so much. I love that cover. They did such a good job of capturing like the essence of the book. It's so dreamy awesome. So yeah, I love it.
Tell us a little bit about like how much say do you get in this cover making part of your book?
Very little. Most authors get very little say in their covers. So most publishers will send like a little questionnaire out to authors, and we fill in like themes, the color of our heroine's hair, so that they don't put a blonde model on it when you have a dark colored, heroine.
Okay.
And so you do kind of themes or colors, or, you have a little bit of information. So like I put in mine that it's in the mountains of Burma. Tiger is one of the biggest themes and metaphors throughout the book. And then, so you see actually on the cover, it's like the jungle mountains, and then in this beautiful blue greens, and then the red tiger, bam. So it's kind of an amazing cover.
Yeah, they did a fantastic job with that. I wonder, did you get like drafts of this, or did they hit it on the first time?
They hit it on the first time.
Amazing.
So there was one other cover. So they kind of sent me like, here's this one or this one. And I was like, is there a choice? Like, really? Is that one? And it was funny because the marketing gal who sent it to me, she's just like, yeah, we all felt the same way, but
Yeah, we got to give you an option.
No, that was amazing. Go, just run with that. So it was really cool.
Yeah, I also was drawn to it because historical fiction is my go-to genre of choice. Like when I get to pick books, that would be my go-to. And so Tell me about your research process that you did for this book.
So the funny thing with this book is this is actually the first book I've ever wrote, like the full length book. I have kids'
Okay.
books. This is the first book I ever wrote, but it's the third book that was published, which that's
Wow.
not
Okay.
hugely, hugely unusual. So I actually finished writing this book, I think it was like 9 years ago. And then
Wow.
it sat because it just wasn't the right time in the market for it. Nobody
Yeah.
was really interested in the East and the stories that came out of the East. And so it just kind of sat there. So my research was basically, it started with me trying to find a World War II story that hadn't been told yet.
Yeah.
And that kind of brought me to the China, Burma, India theater, which most Americans know very little about. And then I realized that the basic area where this took place, my roommate in college grew up in India, and I went home with her, and it's in the mountains. So it's in the Himalayan mountain range and just on the other side of the border. So Burma is kind of wedged between China in the east and then India in the west. So it's kind of wedged right in between.
I'm glad you say that because I did consult a map as I was reading just to kind of give myself perspective once I got
Well,
into the story.
and the thing that makes it hard is that there's been a name change. So it is
Yeah.
no longer Burma. It is now Myanmar. So if you hear Myanmar, there's a lot of humanitarian issues happening in Myanmar that have continued to happen in Myanmar since the end of World War II to contemporary times. So you'll hear it here and there. And there's all kinds of reasons for that actually kind of a little bit appear in the book. It's not a focus, but there's just a lot of people groups in that
Yeah.
area. And so I had when I went into the research part, I had the memories of being in India in the mountains in the jungle type areas with my roommate. And so I had a lot of information, but when I was in India, I wasn't researching the book.
Yeah.
So you approach things differently when you're going for research than when you're going just to visit. So I did crazy things like I listened to recordings of the mountains in the Kitchen Territory.
Wow.
There's a couple of recordings that happened. The Hukwang Valley is where the book mostly takes place, and that's a real location in the world. And has one of the largest tiger reserves in the world in that area. And so there's recordings that they have done on that preserve. So I listened to those while I was writing. So all kinds of things just to give texture and ambiance to the book.
Yeah.
Very much a person, when I write, I'm somebody who wants the reader to experience everything with me. So it's kind of a fun way to do it, to hear the sounds as you're writing it, as you have my characters running through the jungle and evading the Japanese Imperial soldiers. So it's kind of a fun thing to do. And then just lots of reading, which,
Yeah.
darn, I have to read. So, yeah, but there's not a lot actually written about that area of the war, mostly because there were very few Western soldiers in the area, and it was a very brutal war. So people just didn't want to write about it. But it was fun
Yeah.
to read that stuff about it.
I feel like your descriptions were they felt like I was in the forest and in the jungles of that. And so it was very descriptive and like evocative, and it almost like transported me to that place, which that's part of why I love historical fiction, because I'm learning about another part of the world that I probably will not experience in my lifetime, especially not in that time frame, right? And so I loved the descriptions in the book. They were beautiful. So for this was the first novel you wrote, but how long do you spend researching? Like, are you researching as you're writing, or like, what is your process there?
Yeah, so it's a weird process. If we're just going to be honest, I feel like my process is very messy, but it works for me.
Yeah.
And so I typically start with three things. I start with a question.
Okay.
So in Darkness Calls the Tiger, it was how do you deal with all of this stuff that happens? And that's in general, those are the questions that general question is in all of my books. Like, how do you deal with this really awful situation?
Yeah.
And how do you find hope and beauty in that really awful place? Because let's be honest, life is often pretty awful.
Yeah.
And I would like to believe, and I choose to believe that there's goodness even when it's not pretty. And so that's kind of the basic question for all of my books. So I start with that question. I start with a historical, like cool little nugget. So in this case, the Ketchen Rangers is a group of, they were led by American officers, but they were Ketchen people.
Yeah.
And they were recruited to the American forces because of the missionaries in the mountains. So they were recruited to the Allied side because of these missionaries. And so that little historical nugget also gave me my character, because then
Okay.
I had Kylie Moran, who's this girl growing up who knows nothing other than the kitchen village where her father was a missionary. And what happens when the Japanese imperial soldiers came through and destroyed everything she knows.
Yeah.
And what do you do with that? I mean, how do you move through that? And so that's where I tend to start with those three things. So like a location, historical thing, a
Okay.
question, and a character. And then I just start doing my research and I dig through what's going on in the world during that time period. I start looking at um, what is influencing, in this case it's very political, so it's
Yeah.
what's influencing the political situation that's going on, um, and what's the culture like. So it's a very different culture
Yeah.
than ours, a very different culture. But even contemporary today, the kitchen people would call themselves Christians. So in the mountains, they tend to call themselves Christians, and then here in the States, the refugee populations would consider themselves Christian. And
Okay.
so there's this interesting mix of history and culture for them. So I was digging into that, and that affects the very first opening scene is Kailin as a little girl, and the Jawa, who is the kind of the storyteller of the
Okay.
kitchen table, telling this legend. And this legend is something that is in all of the people groups in the Himalayan mountains in that area. So coming in from China all the way through Burma, there are legends of tiger people. And whether they're like tigers that transform into people, or people that transform into tigers, or they're just kind of like the they take on this persona of a tiger, but they all have these legends. And when I stumbled on that in my research, I thought that is exactly the persona that Kylan takes on, my main
Yeah.
character. And very early in the book, the Jaiwa then tells this story, and makes her feel even more like an outsider, and tells this story and tells her that she is going to be this tiger person, the Shara, when she grows up. And she is going, it's this horrible prediction for her. And so the book is her working out that prediction and that legend and that legacy for her, and whether she's going to accept that as her fate or not.
Yeah. I loved this quote. I had it written down about how you don't have to let the darkness call the tiger raging inside you. And I think it speaks to kind of what you said of how she was faced with trial after trial after trial. And just when you think it's like the next thing's going to absolutely devastate her, and how that gave her some revenge in her heart, right? And she had to wrestle with this. And I just thought that was so beautiful about how you don't have to let it consume you too, and this lesson that you could take from that.
Yeah, I am somebody who has learned the hard way, unfortunately, the hard way. Um, we cannot choose our circumstances in life.
Yeah.
Life is going to give us hard times and it's going to give us good times. But what we can choose is how we react to them. So we can react with revenge and anger and bitterness, but that only consumes who we are. And that leaves us with ash, which is part of the legend that this tiger person will come, and the Shara becomes this tiger person, and they are, by the end, they exact revenge, they destroy everything, all the bad things, but in exchange, they become this horrible ash. They're all burnt up in the end. And I don't want to be that. I don't want to be
Yeah.
that. And so it becomes a choice. Are you going to shrivel up into ash and get your revenge in what you think will help, or will you find a different way? Will you choose to take a different path, and find the goodness in whatever's been handed to you?
Yeah, it's so interesting that you're talking about this because I was listening to a podcast this morning and it was talking about a teacher who had all like their students write down everybody that offended them within the day, and then they would write down what offended them and why, and like they kept this notebook that they kept all year long, and they kept it in a backpack, and then they were carrying this around, and just how it got heavier and heavier. And then he compared it to like, this is what revenge does to your heart. Like after they got annoyed, 6 months down the road, like, why are we carrying all this around in our backpack? It's heavy, it's a burden. And he's like, that's what it does to your heart too. So it's so interesting that you bring that up, because this moment I had, and I was like, what a cool metaphor to think about what it does to us.
Yeah. And it is a hard thing. I'm not saying it's easy. By the
Yeah.
way, I'm not saying it's easy. It's simple, but not easy.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm always really hesitant in places like this where people don't know me and don't know my story, that people might think that I'm being flippant or Pollyanna. But I will tell you, and it's in the back of the book, there's a little
Yeah.
bit of a story, super short, condensed. We almost lost our daughter multiple times to some crazy health issues. And actually, as the book was releasing, literally the day it released, I was in the hospital with my mom with a very, 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 very similar situation, and we almost lost her too.
Oh my gosh.
So I don't say these things easily. I don't demand it of other people. I
Yeah.
suggest it. I say this feels way better in the end, and it's not immediate either. It takes time. It takes time.
Yeah. That was one of the questions that was submitted, actually, was about your author's note and the story of your daughter from the back of the book, and all of the, the PTSD and the trauma that your family experienced, and that she thought it was such a beautiful tie-in with your story between Ryan and Kylin, right? That's how I
Yeah.
pronounce it. Okay,
Mhm.
about Kylin and how they had to kind of go through that themselves. And she just wanted to say that that was such, it came full circle when she read the author's note at the
Yeah.
end.
Yep. And it's interesting because most people, they read the author's note, and they realize what it means. But then most people don't realize that the dedication is to my daughter too.
Oh,
Uh,
now I have to go back. I'm like, wait, I got to go
so
back.
I was gonna say, if you want me to read it, I have it right
Yeah.
here. And I will tell you, her name means strong and courageous.
Okay.
And I did not name her that with the intent of her going through awful things and having to learn how to be strong and courageous, just for
Yeah.
the record.
Yeah. We wouldn't do that to our kids.
No, and in fact, she was a very strong personality. And I looked at my husband and I at one point, and I'm like, why did we do this to ourselves?
Yeah.
But then that strength is also, I do truly do believe it's what got her through everything that she went through. But it says, to my beloved girl, you are the very definition of strong and courageous. I am in awe of you. May you choose to continue to trust, and in doing so, find the peace no one can take from you.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
And that's really what it is. That's the story of the book, is finding, Kylin is put in this really horrible situation,
Yeah.
and she believes courage is equals revenge, that the only way to find peace is revenge, and through the revenge, then that ash death is a kind of peace, which is really horrific to think about. But
Yeah.
it is a form of relief. And I love that Ryan, so we haven't really talked about Ryan.
Yeah.
Ryan is a missionary who comes in later, and he's kind of this bumbling bear of a character, super fun guy. But he feels like he's a failure because he's not doing it the way that everybody else does.
Yeah.
And boy, do I ever identify with that. But he is the voice that, it says to Kylin, there are more than one choices. There is another option here.
Yeah.
How about we explore that one, shall we? Um, and he is this interesting blend of being super, super strong and super, super soft, which I think is a unique thing in the world, that there's a guy out there and there are, that are strong people but are also like the core of them is that soft gentleness. And I happen to have one in my life, so I'm very grateful for him.
Yay.
I know. So it's just it was a interesting thing to explore where we have this very strong woman who is very angry and this quite strong man, but who's also soft and can kind of take her beatings, so to speak.
Yeah.
Not literal physical fists, but sometimes her verbals, and find a way through to her softness, that the core of her that she's trying to protect.
Yeah, and help her find herself in that. And I actually have the one other question that we had submitted was a follow-up about Ryan actually, and about I just loved the anecdotes of like where his mom would kind of come in, right? And it'd be like in this italicized font. And I love these older characters in books because I think they can provide so much wisdom for us. And the quote that I loved was, if you have trust in the dark, now that is faith. And I think it's such an interesting topic to explore, to truly trust in the dark and in those hard times, because I think we question, and I think it's our nature to be like, why me, why me, why me, right? And we want to just push it away because we know it hurts and it sucks and it's just not something we want to go through. um, but there's that, it's a refining process. I think that God is like, okay, yep, you got to go through this to get you where we want you to go, right? That refinement and creating a diamond out of us.
But and I often said during this time period where my daughter was struggling, and as a result, we're all struggling.
Yeah.
My son and my husband and I all struggled as well. But one of the things I often tell people when they are struggling with faith, Jesus on the cross said, my God, why have you forsaken me?"
Yeah. Yeah. Even he questioned.
And that's it's okay. It's
Hmm.
okay not to be okay. It's okay to question. It's okay to step into these places where we don't understand. And what I always tell people is it's okay to yell at God because you're still talking to him. If you're yelling at him, you're still talking to him. And so it's one of those places where even if you weren't a person of faith, if you are talking to God, if you are questioning, if you are exploring, it will bring you to the truth. If you are really open to why is this going on? What is happening? And you're really digging into it, I truly believe that you will find truth. And if you're open to it and if you're searching for it, then that's what you're supposed to be doing. And that will bring you to a place of true peace. Um, Not all the time, for the
Yeah.
record, not all the time. It's not going to be like, roses and angels and
This
Cupid.
big voice that's coming to talk to you. It's not going to happen like that.
No, 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 probably not. I would not say never, but probably not.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's not a super easy thing. And I love Ryan's mom coming in the places. You can tell how much she impacted him,
Hmm.
and how much he loved her, and what it meant to have somebody who would listen to him when he was struggling and to encourage. And it's funny because when I said I wrote this book, I finished it like 9 years ago. So my daughter was 10 when I was writing this book originally. And I went back in and changed a lot of it when it was contracted, like some of the emotional side of it, just because I had gained so much more depth
Yeah.
in those 10 years. But as I was crafting the character of Ryan, there was a lot of what I put into his mom, that was the mom that I wanted to be.
Yeah. I
No,
actually have that question. Was this anecdotes your mom gave you, or is this anecdotes you're giving your children? Like, which way did that go?
it's more anecdotes that I gave my kids. My mom is an amazing woman. I love her to pieces. Um, but my childhood story is not necessarily an easy one either. And so my mom did the best she could with what
Yeah.
she had. And that's something actually I tell my kids all the time too. Do the best with what you have today.
Yeah.
Do the best you can with what you've got today. And it might not be as good as what it was yesterday, and it might not be as good as what it's going to be tomorrow, but just do the best with what you got.
Yeah.
Um, and so one of my good friends, her name is Sarah. She's older, a little bit older than I am, and her kids are a little bit older than my kids. And we did a lot of life together. We've been friends for 26 or 27 years. And listening to her work with her kids and discipline her kids, I learned a lot from that. And so some of the wisdom is a little bit like from my mom, a little bit from Sarah, a little bit from what I have learned along the way, and kind of weave it into Ryan's mom. I just realized I never gave Ryan's mom a name.
Yeah, I actually
Wait,
I was going back like as I was writing questions the other day and I was like, okay, don't want to misspeak and like she had a name and I didn't give her one, but I couldn't find it.
I did not give her a name because, and that is kind of one of those funny things that you stumble on as an author, but Ryan would never have thought of her
Yeah, as a name.
as a name. And
No.
so it just never, and she's never on the page particularly. Because she was in Indiana, and I won't tell you anything that happened.
Yeah.
There's
He
backstory
had his
there.
own, yeah, he had his
He
own.
has his own stuff
Yeah.
to deal with. But yeah, it never came up on the page. That's okay. So there you go. There's your one fact, y'all, that
Well, and
nobody
I
else
didn't
knows.
mean to point it out. Like I said, I just more didn't want to misspeak on the episode and be like,
No,
I'm calling her Ryan's mom, but does she have a name? And I'm like, I missed it because I just read it. I didn't catch it at all
no,
when I
no,
read it. So,
no. Nope. Isn't that funny though? And there should be no reason that she would have a name, but like on the page. But there you go.
did you find healing yourself as you wrote this? And I know obviously you wrote this before, I'm assuming your daughter's medical problems started, but post you went back. So, did you find healing
Yeah.
yourself?
Um, yes, in a lot of ways I did. In a lot of ways it was really hard to go back through.
Yeah.
This was a all of my books are so hard to write. I told one of my writer friends, I'm like, I want to write rom-coms. How come I can't be the one to write rom-coms? Because I just want to laugh. And instead I'm over here like killing myself over my characters. I
Emotionally.
emotionally wrought over my characters. Yeah, but no, I did. It was good to sit and be reminded that first of all, nowhere are we ever promised good things. Nowhere are we ever promised physical safety, which is a whole plot point that Kylan's dad is, Japanese won't attack us because we're an American church
Yeah.
kind of idea. And I'm like, yeah, that's not going to happen. And Ryan says one of his comments was, I've seen plenty of broken steeples in my day, which is such a good reminder to me that just because my metaphorical steeple is broken doesn't mean that their hope is gone. It doesn't mean that there's no beauty to be found. It doesn't mean that I'm abandoned. And it's just a reminder to pick myself back up and keep taking those steps. And one of the things I often say too is if it isn't good yet, it's not done yet.
Yeah.
It's not good yet. It's not done yet. And again, sounds super Pollyanna. I would never say that to somebody who's in the hospital. I typically only say it to myself.
Yeah.
But it's a good reminder. It's a good mantra for myself to not get stuck in the woe is me, this really stinks, down in the dumps kind of thing. So, that's a really long answer to your very short question.
It's okay.
Yes, I do find myself learning a lot through my characters. I often, when I'm rereading back through things, I think, wow, I wrote that. That's really smart.
Look at me.
Hey, saying cool stuff. Yeah, but it's interesting how much my characters have to teach me. And I think too, there's a saying in the writing world that if you don't cry over your keyboard, your readers won't cry over the book. So I need to get a waterproof keyboard. I keep a lot of Kleenex next to me, but yes, I love I love finding the good things, and my characters often bring me there.
Yeah. Well, Lexi put a beautiful comment in here, so I just want to read it really quick that it's rare to find a book that is questioning and blaming God, which resonates with many of us, and then comes full circle so we can understand why these things happened. And also, she loved the dedication to the historical accuracy, even if it wasn't pretty.
Yeah, that is the historical part of writing historical novels is probably my favorite part. So the research is absolutely my favorite part. And I know the listeners can't see
Yeah.
this, but I'm going to show you. So this is part of my research for my next
Wow.
and that's just the stuff that's not in a book.
Yeah.
Um, so I love finding the history and digging into that, and it affects the plot points too. So end up following rabbit trails that lead me to things like the Legend of the Shara, which is such a cornerstone to Darkness Calls the Tiger.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing that. That one of my follow-up questions is do you have any projects that you're working on? And it sounds like you are.
I do. In fact, I do. I don't have a contract for it, so I can't say a
Yeah.
lot. It
Okay.
is currently with editors though right now, so fingers crossed.
Yay.
And it is a little later than Darkness Calls the Tiger. So it is the 1976 to 1978, which blows my mind that that is entering historical, but it is 50 years old.
What a reminder.
Oh, I know. I can feel my joints creaking as I'm sitting here in my old age. No, not really, but yes. So, and it's half of it takes place in Cairo, Egypt.
Okay.
Other half takes place in New Orleans.
Cool.
I know there's all sorts of crazy historical ties between the two cities. So,
Wow, I'm very intrigued. I can't
yeah,
wait to
yeah.
hear more. So you'll have to keep us posted. Well, was there a book that made you want to become a writer?
Oh my gosh. So, a funny story about how I became a writer. Um, I started college as a chemistry major.
Okay.
I was always a reader. The first book I ever read, like chapter book, was The Witch, and the Wardrobe, and that was in first grade. So it was
Wow.
a little
Yeah, I
precocious,
was saying, wow, that's pretty early.
smidgen precocious. I mean, it's probably one of my favorite books of all time.
Yeah.
And it's probably because it's the one that I first identified with a character in Lucy and Lucy Pendragon and being the little kid. And I was third of four kids and being a little weird and kind of ignored and a little picked on. And so she was the first person that was like, oh, she would totally understand me.
Yeah.
And from there, I just love to read. And told you guys I was a chemistry major in college in my first semester. I hated it. I hated it. I got great grades, but I hated it. And I called my mom, and she says, in all the mom wisdom here, just do what you love for a little while. And I was 17 at the time, precocious, remember?
Yeah.
I was 17 in college. And I said to my mom, and I quote, "Nobody gets paid to read, mom." Which the great irony is, if you guys remember, Kara at the beginning said, I'm an editor. So yeah, I
Yeah.
literally get paid to read, y'all.
I love it.
And at one point, I was working actually for the marketing department of a publisher and then freelancing the editorial side. And my boss on the editorial side said, you should try writing a book. And because, we've already established I'm a little precocious, I wrote a book.
Yes.
That is not Darkness Calls the Tiger, for the record. It was a kid's book. Um, and I loved it. I loved it. But then I had kids, and there's only so much you can do when you have kids. Because I was working and had kids, I was like,
Yeah.
okay, I can't edit and write and have kids. And so I didn't write again until my daughter was about 10 when I started writing Darkness Calls the Tiger. And I haven't looked back. So there was never a book that I went, oh, I want to be like them. I was always the person that read the books and said, I could never be them.
Yeah.
I held authors and books on such a high pedestal that I never thought that I could ever be that amazing to be a published author. And so when my boss said that to me, it was like, I can't, can I do that? Really? Like, am I allowed to do that? And
Yeah.
so it was
All it
amazing.
takes is one person, though, I think, to believe in you, right? Of like that
Yeah,
one person that, and that gets that wheel turning of like, well, maybe I can.
maybe. So if you're listening and you have like this inclination, go do it, go try it. Write a short story, see if you like it, you
Yeah.
know? Because like I was a writing major in college, but it was like, it was not because I thought I was going to be a writer. I know that sounds bizarre, but it was because it was something that I knew would be a usable skill. And so I was looking more at like the marketing and public relations side of writing, like the
Yeah.
marketing copy and stuff.
Yeah.
So
Like copyright and that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Wow. I think I've had quite a few conversations recently on the podcast about tapping into what we loved as children that we told ourselves we couldn't do because it wouldn't make the money, right? Like we've been told, oh, you need to go into something else, like this won't. And so, but tapping back into what we loved as kids.
yes. And that is something actually that I have been kind of messing with in my head too. Um, because it's like these, you've got pivot points in your life, right?
Yeah.
And so last year I quit my full-time job with a publisher and I work for myself now. I'm a freelance editor,
Okay.
which opens this huge door of opportunity where I can do whatever I want to do. It's amazing, and totally overwhelming
Yeah.
in every way. And it's been really, really good. But it has given me the chance to go back and say, what did I used to love to do? And why did I
Yeah.
stop? And how can I incorporate that into what I do now? So it's been a really fun season of rediscovering and figuring it out. And also feeling like I am at the edge of a cliff and about ready to fall off all at the same time.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I think we have to do that in motherhood too, right? Of like you said, it's we can only spin so many plates at the same time, and so we put a lot of things on the back burner in those, tougher years of motherhood. And so when you finally have that moment where you're like, I can take a breath, maybe I can even toss a dream in there too, and I can get another plate spinning in the air potentially. But I think you have to rediscover yourself again. I mean, I can't speak to all moms. I know everybody on this call is a mom, but I feel like you lose yourself a little bit. So finding you again.
It's something that life takes it out of you.
Yeah.
It totally takes it out of you. And actually, the character that I'm writing right now is a people pleaser. And boy, do I identify with that. And she has bent herself into these horrible contortions to be what everybody else wants her to be. And now she's confronted with the mess that has made for her. And how do you fix that? And so it's an interesting thing now that I'm sitting here talking to you about it, that she is figuring out who she is again, just as I am trying to figure out who I am again as well. It's been an interesting, fun kind of thing to play with and rediscover for
Yeah.
sure.
I think it's cool though too because it means we're not permanent, right? Like that story that we tell ourselves, we don't have to be that person always. It just goes to show like back to your pivot points, right? You have these moments of your life of like this we can change and we can be different and we're not stuck as this thing we've pigeonholed ourselves to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. Yes.
Yeah. Well, let's finish off here today. You brought a book flight of 3 books, and can you tell us a little bit about how you chose these?
Oh my gosh. This was one of the hardest exercises I've done in a really long time.
I've done it for
Um,
myself too, so I can agree with you. Sorry.
oh, it was so hard to pick books. So what I did, because I started like, oh, what are some of my favorite books? And I'm like, okay, this is too hard. So like books in the last 6 months that I've read.
Perfect.
It's kind of like the parameters that I put. And actually at the beginning of this year, I read a series of books, like bang, 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 that were all 5 stars for me, which
Oh, that was a good
like
one.
never happens, right? And I'm going to throw one in on you because I just finished a book that is another 5 star.
Okay.
So the first one is Marvelous by Molly Greeley.
Okay.
And this book is the real historical genesis for Beauty and the Beast.
Oh,
I know. It's like super early France. So it's
okay.
like 1500s, French court. And this kid who is really hairy, as a child, is stolen from home and sold into the French court. And he becomes this like showpiece for the French court. And this girl, this woman whose father falls on hard times, is basically sold to the court to be his wife.
Wow.
And it is just exquisitely written and like this heart-wrenching but like beautiful story of these two people coming together, and figuring things out, and their story. And it's just like I read when I'm teaching writers, because I teach writers a lot, when I'm reading portions of this book to authors of like, you guys, this, listen to this, listen. There, everybody's just in awe. So it's just exquisitely written, crazy cool story. And if you like history, it's so good. So good.
Okay.
It's a little bit quieter. There's not like battle scenes and stuff, which I also love.
Sure.
There's not a huge amount of, there is some, but there's not a huge amount of like external stakes that are happening. But I love that kind of thing too, that just kind of delves into history and people and how things work, and gives you a great, like beautifully written story. All right.
I'm
Then
so excited you brought that one. I just finished Beyond Ivy Walls. I
yes.
loved it. And I'm being Belle. I have like the North Park Book Fair. I have a booth and it's Halloween themed. And so I'm like, oh, I'll be Belle, like the original bookworm. So I just love that you brought this book because I'm like, oh, this is such a fun tie-in.
That is a super cool tie-in. Yeah, there's so many ties in that. So yes, 100%. Highly, highly recommend that
Okay.
one.
All right. So Marvelous by Molly Greeley. Okay. Perfect.
And then my second one is Shelterwood by Lisa Wingate. I love Lisa Wingate. This one is like the opening of one of the early national parks. It's a made-up park, but there's like
Okay.
all sorts of historical ties of things that actually really happened. And she brings in how the Indian population, the American Indian population, was basically abused by the American government, kind of shunted off to the side. And the parks did some crazy, weird stuff. And I love this story because everybody was asking me, they're like, did it kill you at the end? Because a couple of Lisa's last few books have killed everybody at the end, and you
Yeah.
just want to like go sob your eyes out for the next 5 years.
We just live with Kleenex boxes by our
Right?
side.
Right. You will like the ending of this book. If
Okay.
you like Lisa Wingate's writing, but your heart was torn out and you're not sure you can handle it, you will like the ending of Shelterwood. So
Okay. I've been seeing the cover everywhere. It's so pretty.
it's so pretty. And I mean, who doesn't love national park stories? I love them. I love that she's using, so the historical setting, it's children as the main characters, and then her more contemporary, but it's not, it's like 1970s, is an adult, single mom. So there's
Okay.
all kinds of cool stuff. She's one of the first female park rangers. And she's this mix
So
of tough
cool.
and soft, and oh, she's gorgeously written. So I love that one to pieces too.
Okay. All right. So Shelterwood by Lisa Wingate. And then what's
Yeah.
the next one?
I Cheerfully Refuse by Leaf Enger. So I Cheerfully Refuse by Leaf Enger. Leaf Enger wrote Peace Like a River probably 10, 15 years ago. I don't remember how long. No, it's been longer than that. Long time ago, which was one of my favorite books. And he's got this super cool mix of styles that is just so unique to him. There's a little bit of I don't know, magic, dystopian wackadoodliness, all wrapped into this super imaginative books. All of his books are that way. And I Cheerfully Refuse. It takes place in like in the lakes of northern Michigan. So like the Great
Okay.
Lakes,
Yeah.
Canada, that type of a thing. But it's way in the future when the economy has collapsed, and it's this guy who is trying to make peace with the murder of his wife is kind of the idea. And the people who murdered her, he thinks are kind of governmenty official
Oh,
type people, but there's
okay.
not really a government. So it's like these weird, mysterious characters. And he's on a sailboat. And I love being on the water. So it's all of these things. And he saves a kid. And it just is like this weird, like you should be like, this is the weirdest book I have ever read. And it isn't. I have studied this book to figure out how he pulls it off.
Yeah.
And again, he's this beautiful lyrical writer. He's so precise in his word choice that you just like, you fall in love with the language and his precision of how he says things, that it's just a beautiful, beautiful book. So if you guys did read Peace Like a River and you were kind of disappointed with some of his other books, you will like this one. This one is really good.
Okay. Yeah, we've had Peace Like a River. I think it's been on a book flight twice on
Yeah.
the episode. Don't quote me for sure once, but I believe it was a second time as well.
I highly recommend that one, but this one I really, really like. And then can I
Okay.
add a fourth one? Because I
Of
just
course.
literally
Yes,
finished it today.
we can do a dessert pairing here.
Oh, I love it. And actually it fits this book very well. It's called The Lion Woman of Tehran.
Oh, yes.
Um,
Yep.
and it is Marjan Kamali.
Yes.
Oh, you guys, I don't usually cry when I read books. I
Yeah.
cry all the time when I write books, but I don't usually cry when I read books. This book, like I was sobbing at a couple of points. And I was listening to this book, which means I was driving. Not good, but good all at the same time. Um, so it takes place the 1950s to the 1980s-ish, and the last chapter is contemporary.
Okay.
Um, and it's these two friends who meet in Tehran when they're children. It's these two girls meet each other, and they're from very different families. And it's their story of friendship and the struggle for democracy in Iran, and the power of friendship and the power of women. And it is just, I'm like at goosebumps just talking about it right now. It is, I have, because literally I finished this book like 3 hours ago.
Yeah.
Um, I'm still processing, but I was like, I've got to add it because it lives up to the hype. It is a gorgeous book. Yeah, I highly
Yeah, I
recommend.
added that one to my list immediately because I had read, we talked about the stationery shop back on episode 17, I think it was. So way back in the early days of the show. And I loved that. And that's another a book I love reading is when you really learn about a culture and a society. And again, if I feel like I can walk in someone else's shoes. And then I love to, I mean, similar to your book, it's like, would I have reacted the same way faced with similar circumstances? And so I love these types of books. So I admittedly added it to my TBR right after it because I've loved the stationery shop so much. And I haven't read it yet. So this is my push.
This is definitely your push because I like this one better than the stationery shop. And I'm like you, I
Okay.
love different cultures and I love learning the history that I didn't know. There's actually in this book, there are Easter eggs for the stationery shop.
Oh, okay. All
Mhm.
right. I'll have to tell my
So,
friend Anne too, who recommended it to me on episode 17.
yeah. So it is very, very good. Very good
Okay.
book.
All right. So The Lion Woman of Tehran by Marjan Kamali. Thank you so much for bringing those. I love to end our show with bonus pairings, which are just a speed round of questions. So you can answer these really quick. Are you a rereader?
No.
I love it. Even with studying the book, do you like if you use it for like your classes or your workshops you're talking about? Do you?
Oh, well, that's different because
Okay.
I actually flag pages.
Oh yeah. Okay.
As I'm reading, I underline.
So more like
I'm
the
a
passage
defacer
part.
of books. I dog ear and underline, and I annotate. So I don't actually go, typically, I don't read a whole book.
Yeah, the
I
whole
read
thing. Okay.
the sections.
Okay. Makes sense. Where is your favorite place to read?
I have seasonal places that I like to read. So I live in Michigan. So my absolute favorite place, under my deck, I have hammock swings.
Okay.
So they're not full out hammocks, but they're like a chair that you can sit in, but it like cozies you all in and you're like all cocooned in there and your head is supported and your
Sounds
feet are in
amazing.
there.
Yeah.
It's amazing. However, you do not want to be doing that in January. It is very cold there in January.
Not nearly as cozy in
No,
January.
it is not. And then I have a chair upstairs that I curl into and read. And then I have a fireplace. So if it gets really cold, I'll turn on the fireplace. I have two cats and they like to be my little lap warmers, especially in the winter. And so they'll climb up and fight on my lap. It's fantastic.
Cute.
Yeah.
Vying for your attention.
Yes, they do. They are hilarious. And usually the cats are Brave and Hope. And there are actually reasons for that. They actually relate back to when my daughter was sick. That's when we got the cats.
Okay.
But Brave is an absolute jerk
Yeah.
and awesome, but an absolute jerk to his sister. So he usually wins.
That's funny. That's so funny. All right. Well, lastly, what are you reading next?
Well, I just finished Lion Women of Tehran, and I am going to be in a total and complete book coma for at least a week.
Yeah.
I need that time to digest that amazing book. But I actually need to jump back into some books of Egyptian mythology.
Okay.
To finish up because I'm editing the book that is out there being pitched. And I love mythology. The legends and myths end up in I think every book that I have written has had some form of either legend or myth in it. So, the Shiraz and Tiger, Frankenstein is in, which isn't really legend kind of, but that is in Shadows in the Mind's Eye. The Arthurian legend is in my novella In a Little Town. So I love them.
That. Yeah, how cool. Well, good luck with that and your research coming up. And thank you so much for coming with me on the show today. I know your time is precious and I appreciate all you've given me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. It was a joy.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for listening to this episode today of our first ever BFF book club with Janyre Tromp discussing Darkness Calls the Tiger. If you'd like to join our monthly literary adventure, you can just head to the link in our show notes for the BFF book club. Next month, we are reading How the Penguins Saved Veronica by Hazel Pryor. And in December, we have a Christmas rom-com. In January, we are back with another historical fiction. So head to the link in the show notes to learn all about our upcoming books and how you can register to join us. Read the book, join the club, meet the author. Find out more at bookishflights.com. That's it for today. We'll finish with my favorite quote from Emma Thompson. I think books are like people in the sense that they will turn up into your life when you most need them. Cheers to you, dear readers. Until next time. That is also where you can find more information about today's book flight or other books that we talked about. I want to inspire a community of readers. So whenever you share a post about what you are reading or what you are reading next, especially if you have heard about it on the show, please tag us on Facebook or Instagram at Bookish Flights. If you enjoyed the show, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Your review not only helps the show, but it also helps the podcast to reach others. Make sure you are subscribed on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to make sure you will not miss an episode. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. As Emma Thompson said, I think books are like people in the sense that they'll turn up in your life when you most need them. Cheers to you, dear readers. Until next time.